City of Stevens Point Finance Committee meeting, recorded October 12, 2020.
Yep, I'm trying to find all my sheets, so I'm just asking for a moment to get everything
So I'll help you vamp. As we were having the discussion about the citywides, some may have noticed or some may have missed that there were links to a discussion we had not long ago. I thought a good discussion, regardless of which side you were on, about whether to shift any of those positions to appointed. We had a
Alder, you need to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
We absolutely cannot talk about anything that's not on the agenda, especially when we're not even in an official meeting.
No more vamping.
Sorry.
Are we done?
You're on, President Johnson.
Okie dokie then. Again, I lost it. There we go. All right, it is 7:13. I'm sorry, I'm trying to eat my dinner. I had to take some medication that upsets my stomach, so I'm going to try and get some food in it. The first item on our agenda for this evening is the roll call, and I'm not quite sure who's going to be doing that.
Yep, I can do that. Dalton.
Here.
Johnson.
I am present.
Morrow.
Here.
Shore.
Here.
Slowinski.
Here.
Okay, we have 5 present.
Thank you very much for that. Excuse me. The second item on the agenda is consideration of the 2021 capital budget and capital improvement plan for 2022 through 2025. How would we like to handle this? So I guess I would entertain a motion, since everyone is silent, to bring it to the floor in a motion, and then we can have discussion. Or not.
Alder Dalton, I would move approval for further discussion.
There is a motion on the floor to approve. Is there a second?
I second.
Excuse me.
Morrow.
Alder Morrow seconded. All right, discussion. Mr. Mayor, you seem confused.
I am confused. I heard Alder Dalton motion to approve discussion, not approve the budget. Is that correct?
I said move approval for further discussion, because without a motion on the floor, there's no reason to continue discussing the budget. So there's a motion on the floor to approve the capital budget as presented.
Approve the budget. Gotcha.
Oh, yes. Discussion.
All right, so she just said motion for the capital budget, and we're talking about operating.
No, we're talking about capital. Item 2. Item 2 is consideration of the 2021 capital budget and capital improvement plan for 2022 through 2025.
Oh, I am so sorry. I have the wrong agenda.
That seems to be a
Wow.
problem this evening. Yeah, no problem.
I clicked
Alder
on the
Slawinski.
agenda and it popped up September's. I apologize.
Yep, not a problem. Not a problem. Alder Shore.
I have gone through the budget closely, and one thing it might be helpful to have kind of a refresher on is so the major street reconstruct projects are there. And then the surface improvements are separate, as they always are. But if Director Badun could remind us what kinds of things are in one category versus the other, I think that could be useful.
Very well. Director Badun, could you help clarify there?
I guess I'll just sure. I think I got just. Can you just otherwise ask what specifically you're looking for clarification to separate things apart?
Yeah. So what is the surface improvement? Is that are chip seal projects in there?
Okay.
The category surface improvements is what?
Sure. Yeah. So what we otherwise have as far as the street surface improvements, yeah, those are typically our chip seals. We've got, of course, our reconstructs, and you should see within the program we have laid out, we try to identify all the streets, identified those. Those are typically the reconstructs, which include all the, service improvements as well as the utility stuff. Then typically within there, we have, a certain, the way we categorize it, just the service improvements, which is just the chip seals, additional patching, some small, like smaller type projects. And that's where all of our preventative maintenances would be, such as the, like I said, the chip sealing, the infrared patching that we've started doing a few years back, and those sorts of improvements, as well as some of the things that could include curb and gutter, and other roadway improvements as well. But that's predominantly the maintenance activities, and maintenance is, of course, where we save the most money in the long run, taking care of our roads before they need to be reconstructed.
Thank you.
All right. Other questions from members of the committee? Questions, comments, or clarification from other alders? I'm waiting my requisite 5 to 7 seconds. So I have a couple of questions since no one else does. In the DPW budget, there's a line item for the DPW facility study. I want to make sure that that is the feasibility study to look at what it would take and where we would go with the streets department. Is that correct? Someone provide me with some information there.
Yes, that's the intent. So the council chose to move forward, trying to get the streets department out of the Buchel Park area.
Yep.
In that direction, we are doing that. And this is step one. What do we need so we know where we might be able to put it and how much it might cost?
Wonderful. It's sitting on some valuable property. I think finding another location for it that complements the area is a wise choice. The other is in the DPW, and it looks like it's extending out to 2022, is the engineering garage. Could I have a little bit more information on that, please?
Same sort of thing. I'll let the director speak in just a second, but we had talked about combining the facility, because right now engineering is at City Hall and the rest of Scott's staff is over at the streets garage. That disconnect creates issues. We had talked about that before. The council chose not to do anything, but I'll let the director then continue.
Right. It's actually, well, my hope would be one of two things. Yes, because there's a disconnect, we're looking to see what we could do as far as what would be, realizing we aren't going to have all the money to relocate the streets garage and everything, and it's starting to do it. It'd be nice to try to see if we can make some improvements there that would otherwise house all of us. If that weren't otherwise the case, the one thing that has been talked about even before I took this position was at least getting the ability to co-locate all of our vehicles, if nothing else, at least to get them off the street and such, to do that. So if it's not us in some sort of entirety of engineering, it's at least our vehicles as a portion there to see what we can otherwise do. I think that even Superintendent Laidlaw, who I even see as on here today, would otherwise comment that even that small part of whatever it could be, vehicles that are housed inside, have much less maintenance over their life than vehicles that are otherwise left outside. So it's kind of see what we can other stretch the dollars are to see what we can do, but that would be kind of that at least interim thing before we would go off to be able to, knowing we won't be able to get a new building right away, unless of course the mayor wins the lottery. He promised me.
Well, I don't count on lottery wins. I'd rather count on good planning. And I think this is the first step to that good planning. I think in looking at that property and its value to that entire neighborhood, whether it's park or residential neighborhoods, removing the streets department from that area, I think is going to be worth every single penny we put into it, because we'll reap it back in the sale of taxable properties. I couldn't agree more with you, Director, on combining your team in one place. I know what it's like to have a team that's not in one place, and it's very hard to have continuity and a positive work culture. So I'm totally in support of that. Thank you for that information.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The other thing I wish to do, and this will be in the form of an amendment to the motion to approve, this will be to remove the $2.6 million for the acquisition of real estate for the Business 51 project, and that's projected $2.6 million cost for 2024. I believe that a portion of this is kind of a legacy of the former AECom projections of what was needed for the Business 51 corridor. I'm going to make a motion to remove that from the capital budget until we have a more realistic understanding of what's going to happen with that corridor. My underpinning in that motion, and I hope I have a second.
I'll second.
Is that, pardon me?
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second on the floor for an amendment to the budget. Is that, or the capital budget to remove the $2.6 million for real estate acquisition. That's $2.6 million in current taxable property. I would like to keep it as taxable property and keep the corridor as it is with improvements. So that is the rationale for my decision there, and I hope I get support, and I'm happy to listen to any comments. Committee members?
Do you have any idea of where you wanted to put that 2 point some? Where you wanted to put that money?
I would just pull it at this point. I'm not going to put it anywhere.
Okay.
Committee members?
I'm wondering, Alder Dalton from Comptroller Treasurer, if that pulling that creates an unrealistic picture for 2024. If there's some number that should stay in there, understanding that maybe we will be acquiring properties as that, and maybe Director Badoon has some insight on that too.
Okay, I think Director Badoon would be probably the best to answer what the needs might be in terms of property acquisition. Director?
Yes, and then there is, the way that number came about, it is somewhat of a legacy, because it is based upon the previous alternative that was presented from the 2012-2013 study, just taking what was otherwise identified there to at least come up with a value of some sort that we could put into there until we could refine a little bit more. Whether it otherwise be there, it seems like there's definitely been some changes between then and now on what people are telling us and what we're gathering, and we'll continue to refine that to see if that holds true to how they see this fitting either within the corridor and what we may need to purchase. I do think, however, there will be, regardless of what we choose, some need to purchase some properties, whether it be small strips or whatnot, just in order to get there, because otherwise we'll be balancing out the safety needs of what we are for the entirety of the community and any visitors, versus maybe some of the personal property needs there. So trying to balance that out, but I think it's unrealistic that we won't purchase any property. But definitely we don't have a firm number at this time, and until this study is completed and we've done the design, the 30% design, to know what the impacts of those are, we really won't have a firm number for that. So I wouldn't see any reason to, it may be somewhat misleading, quite honestly, at this moment, as far as what's there, based upon how we originated at it.
Does that answer your question, Alder Dalton?
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Other committee members with questions?
This is Alder Slawinski.
Yes, Alder Slawinski.
I guess, yeah, and I agree with Director Badoon. I mean, this number is kind of just out there. I do have a hesitation of completely removing it. I would, again, we really don't know anything until after the study is completed and we're at 30%. So I'm just a little hesitant of completely removing it, because I do believe that there's going to be some acquisition, and who knows how much, but I guess that's my comments. Thanks.
You are very welcome, Alder Slawinski. Other members of the committee? Before I go to the mayor, who has asked to speak, and then I'll go to other alders. I think the point that Alder Slawinski just made is very valid, that we're at about 30%, and it is probably incredibly premature to list that kind of number out there, even if it's a strip of right-of-way. We need to have a better understanding, and I do not want my constituents or others who live along this corridor to think that they are going to be losing their homes or enough property so that their bedroom is sitting in the middle of Division Street. Let's do this right. We have time, and we can get it into a capital plan as we move along. Mr. Mayor, your turn.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. These are placeholder numbers. What we're looking at for approval is 2021. Everything from 2022 to 2025 is an estimate at this point. Land acquisition and everything out there, we try and plan it out so we know what to expect. Removing it at this point is completely appropriate. I would like to keep the line item in there because we don't know what that's going to be yet. If it changes next year or it changes in 2022, we'll put it back in because it's one of those things that we have to know for you to know. But those numbers right now are just estimates. And I agree with President Johnson in this case that we may be at a little on the high side at this point with 2.6. But as Director Badoon said, there will be some acquisition. We just don't know what that is. So we likely won't till 2021.
Thank you, sir. Alder Jennings had requested a moment to speak.
Yes, thank you, President Johnson. As another alder who has a significant part of Division Street bordering their district, I follow President Johnson's recommendation to amend the budget. The idea of widening Division Street needs to be taken off the table. And until that happens, I don't think there should be any discussion about budget. And so the corridor, we need to work within the corridor that exists. And I completely support amending the budget and removing this item. Thank you.
You are very welcome, Alder Jennings. Thank you for your comments. Other alders? Members of the public who wish to comment? Very well. We will take a vote first on the amendment, which will remove the $2.6 million from the 2024 projections in the capital budget that it's presented. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed would be no.
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 Any abstentions? Thank you, everyone. Motion carries. Now we have a motion on the floor to approve the capital budget. Pardon me. Is there any additional discussion on the capital budget that was presented?
Chair Johnson, I'd like to ask a question of the Parks Director.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Absolutely, go ahead. Looking at the projected tennis court resurfacing number compared to the actual cost, is the $115,000 budgeted? That's enough for all the courts and all resurfacing, and have you gotten a sense from the community that that is an amenity that's needed and desired and being utilized, and that really justifies maybe almost twice as much as really we were hoping to pay for that?
Yeah, so I guess that'd be a two-part question. So the first part of the question in terms of usage and the community need for it, that's by far our heaviest used tennis court. We actually have a group that plays every morning. They're here at 5 o'clock in the morning. We turn the lights on for them specifically. They play pretty much all year as soon as it gets cool in the spring. In addition, there's several different youth groups that actually have lessons and activities that are scheduled there, in addition to just the recreational players. Half of the facility is set up for pickleball. So there's a pickleball gathering that also takes place there. So at any given time, you'll see anywhere from 4 to 6 of the courts used. Obviously, when the weather's nice, they're pretty much to capacity. With that said, previous to me arriving, there was a placeholder number placed in the capital budget. I think, as you referenced, it was around 60,000. What we did is, as tennis courts start to deteriorate, a lot of times they crack, and that's what we're dealing with here. On our expansion joints, the courts are actually separating. So what our options are at that point, we had it actually evaluated this year. There's an armor crack filling product. It's a little different than filling a street. It actually is designed that you have to clean that whole crack out. You fill it with the armor crack repair product that actually comes in layers, and it allows, as the asphalt would expand, the moisture from not getting in. So it's a similar premise. However, the armor product is allowed so it can actually have the surface, the tennis coefficient surface that gives it the friction that tennis players like to have, be laid over top of it. And it allows that asphalt surface underneath it to have a longer longevity. So we had the court evaluated. Where we're at right now is our asphalt is in good structure. So we aren't in a place where the moisture's gotten in where we actually have to replace asphalt. Otherwise, you'd see that number probably be 2 to 3 times more expensive than that, because we'd actually have to remove the asphalt or mill and grind it down to repack a base and re-asphalt it. This number is just to go by the lineal foot to repair all of the surface joints that have any cracking, all of the cracking around the partitions where we have the net posts, and then to completely recover and reseal that court so that it can be used, as well as lining it and getting it ready for play. That estimate that we've got was the least expensive. While it's still expensive, it's the least expensive of the options the city has. And the consultant said that could give us another 10 to 12 years if we move forward with it. At that point, as long as the crack surfacing and repair holds up, we should be able to go ahead and resurface it again, as long as we can protect that asphalt surface underneath. So heavily used, definitely one of the most popular courts we have in the community. And we believe this fix should set it up for another decade plus.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Alder Dalton, and thank you, Director Kramer. It appears Alder Shore has a question. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Director Kramer knows that because I'm a glutton for all things detailed about tennis, that I kind of was peeking into the process of that evaluation, and can definitely confirm, having looked closely at it, that was by far the least expensive option. The other thing that we've been exploring, and I want to check on, is the possibility of a USTA grant, where there was an issue with how the USTA doesn't especially like pickleball lines. And so there was a question whether that would just like knock us out of even being able to apply, or whether we could get a proportion, portions of the courts that don't have pickleball lines. And I forget what the math here was. I want to say $20,000 or so in grant possibility, or something like that. Is that something that we still could pursue? Or
I did make contact with the USTA. They made me aware that due to COVID, their funding of the grant project is a little bit up in the air. The first step that I would do if this is approved is would submit what we're going to do with it, basically the plan. And they said they will review it. And they believe that early end of this year, early next year, they'll determine if 2021, if any grant dollars are going to be available, and even 22. They said while they're dealing with the pandemic as well, their program is a little bit uncertain.
Thanks.
Other questions from the committee? Good discussion here. Questions for any of the directors or the mayor as it relates to capital budget from other alders? Alder Kneebone, please.
I have just a quick question for Park Director Kramer about the Iverson Ball Diamond. I've played a few games over there. I wondered what the lighting improvements were going to be, and if there were any thoughts down the line to put an artificial surface on that infield as well.
So the lighting improvements that are place held in the budget right now are based on just an LED estimate that we've got from Musco Lighting, which is pretty much the leader in that industry right now, really nationwide. What we're looking at doing is right now we don't have an agreement with the Stevens Point Youth Baseball Association other than really this arrangement that they utilize the facility and we work together in maintenance of it and upkeep. We're actually they just elected a new president and we've got a meeting on the books to start discussing what their long-term needs are of our facilities. And to that point, at one time, there was several proposals that were talked about down there. I think it even went as far at one time as saying, would they want to relay it out and have 2 ball fields? I think our usage will drive that discussion, but because of the original lighting structures there, if you look at the wood poles, they're coming to the nearing of the end of where we need to do something with them. That discussion based on their usage will help, I think, set us up. I also believe that they would have to be our partner probably for us to do the upgrade of that facility, just because we don't have our own leagues at this point. So that was my intention, was we would discuss with them if they're interested in an upgrade, what their long-term future would be, what our user groups would be. Because aside from the Stevens Point Youth Baseball or the Point Fast Pitch, we just have one fall league that does utilize that facility. Now that we put 3 turf infields out at Zenoff, we do have a state-of-the-art facility that can handle a large traffic load around what they're doing, and they can play pretty much anytime the snow's not flying and we don't have severe weather essentially. So I would say turf is probably at the far extreme. First thing would be, do we need lights and are we going to play on it? And right now we place held it because they are there and they do use it. Turf would probably be a subsequent discussion based on their usage.
Oh, great. Other than mosquitoes, that's a pretty nice little ball field down there.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
You're muted, Melissa.
You're muted.
Sorry, looking at all my Brady box squares and trying to do too many things at once. Thank you for the reminder. I think for 2021, the new phrase for 2021 is "you're muted." So thanks for the reminder. I do have a question for Acting Chief Zenner, and this relates to the budget, the request for dollars for computer forensic equipment and computer hardware related to investigations for CGIS. It seems computer crimes obviously are, I'm assuming this is related to computer crimes, and I'm just curious about that and wondering if that's worth bringing back into the capital budget.
At this point, we're satisfied moving that forward. The equipment that we have is still workable, and we're looking to modify potentially how we want to move forward with that. It's been a specialty that there's certainly other entities out statewide and federally that have been able to assist us to determine whether if we want to continue to support that program or modify it to look a little different than how we operate at this point.
Okay, thank you. I just realized that these kind of things are so critical, and I want to make sure that the needs are being met because we see more of these crimes. Okay, thank you. All right. I think we've run the gamut unless there's no other questions. I'll wait 5 seconds. All right. We have a motion on the floor to approve the capital budget as presented with the amended removal of the money for acquisition of properties for 2024. All those in favor of the budget as amended, capital budget as amended, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Anyone
Aye.
opposed? Anyone opposed would be no. Anyone who wishes to abstain? Very well, motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Great discussion. I love that we're spending so much time on actually dissecting these things. Item 3, changing the internal accounting related to the property at 1101 Centerpoint Drive from TIF 6 to City Property Fund. Corey and I talked about this earlier this week, and I'll let you explain that sort of accounting move.
Sure, and this is purely an internal accounting move. The history here is that in 2011, the city acquired 1101 Centerpoint Drive through a long-term capital lease, basically a lease-to-own type of arrangement. And because that was something that we had to do as part of the overall mall redevelopment project, that was a TIF 6 project, so that building was purchased with TIF 6 funds, and the lease payments have been coming out of TIF 6 funds as far as our acquisition of the control of that building. And since then, we have leased it out to Great Lakes. Initially, the intention was to turn around and sell it, but we ended up leasing it out long-term instead, and we've been putting the revenues, those rental revenues, back into TIF District 6. And so what we're looking to do here is that a TIF district might not be the most appropriate place to have this asset, especially considering that a TIF district is a temporary instrument. And then you also get into the issues of, okay, if we need to invest money into that building, you know, is that an eligible use of TIF district funds and some of those other complexities? So what I'm recommending is, now that we have the city property fund, I'd recommend using the city property fund instead as a much more appropriate fund to have this kind of activity. So I'm proposing to move this asset to the city property fund, and then the city property fund would pay TIF 6 for this asset. I did run some calculations. I'm recommending that we use the number of $283,864. I based that on the present value of the future rents over the near term. And this would also then be a profitable deal for that TIF district. The net unrecovered expenses for TIF District 6 right now are $243,000. So TIF 6 would still come out of this with a profit of about $40,000, which is reasonable because that district did make an investment and take on some risk. And then also the city property fund would have to pay TIF 6 over the course of 2 years, just based on the cash flows of the city property fund and what it has available.
Thank you, Comptroller, Treasurer. Sorry, my dog wants to get in on the action here. It's always good news to hear TIF 6 moving into positive territory. It's had some trouble over the years. Are there any questions for the Comptroller, Treasurer as it relates to this agenda item?
Yeah, I have a quick question. I thought I understood it until he just explained it.
Well, let's see if we can unexplain it for you. How does that sound?
He muddied it up for me here. So
Go ahead, Alder Slowinski.
So I guess if I'm reading the memo right here, so we're going to pay TID 6 $283,864 back from the city property fund to TID 6. Correct?
Yes. Yep. That would be correct.
And that's going to be done within a 2-year period?
Yes, just based on what the city property fund currently has in the bank. The city property fund doesn't have all of that money cash on hand. So that's why what we would do is we would do it over a 2-year period.
Okay, so basically we're just paying back the investment that TID 6 made on this acquisition, or the acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
And then moving forward, any maintenance and everything would come out of the city property fund.
Yep, any maintenance, any expenses would come out of the city property fund, and then any revenues would go into the city property fund.
Okay, now I think I just made it muddy to myself. Okay, I'm good.
Okay.
Thanks.
It's a little bit of a complicated, transaction, and it's not something that we see very often to make a sort of a change like this. So.
All right, thanks.
No.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm trying to navigate a couple of things here. No, it was a good question, Alder Slawinski. Even though the water was muddy, we got it unmuddied. So other questions? Any questions from alders? Members of the public? All right, I would entertain a motion as it relates to this agenda item. Or not?
Alder Dalton, I would move approval of changing the internal accounting as it relates to the 1101 Center Point property and the TIF, from the TIF district fund to the city property fund.
I'll second. Alder Slawinski.
I'll second.
We'll give it to Alder Slawinski. He piped in first, so we have a motion by Dalton, second by Slawinski. And Alder Shore has indicated he's having some connectivity issues. And if there is no other discussion on this particular item.
Uh-oh.
That's Dasher. That's Dasher, by the way. And there's just a little bit of remnant of my supper. So sorry about
His
that,
support,
everyone.
yeah.
Can you let Dasher know that that's not on the agenda?
Dasher's not qualified to vote. All right. Barring any other discussion other than Dasher telling me where to go, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed would be no. Anyone who wishes to abstain. Very well, motion carries. Pardon me. Item 4, borrowing for the 2020 capital projects and development incentives. Comptroller Treasurer Laddick, please.
Yes, so around this time of the year is typically when we do our annual borrowing. So we do have a couple of different borrowing needs. So we have our general capital project borrowing, and then we also have the road extension in TIF District 9. So we're looking at borrowing $3,075,000 for 2020 capital projects, $1 million for the road extension in TIF District 9. And then we're also looking at doing the borrowing for our development incentives that we're going to have to pay. So we're looking at borrowing $1.5 million for the development incentive for Pointer Plaza LLC, which is the student housing project on the north side on the former Kmart site, and then also borrowing $2 million for the upfront incentive for the senior housing project off of Water Street. So total, we're looking at borrowing $7,575,000 for just all those different pieces. And then we are working with our financial advisor, Ellers, to bring a resolution forward for the council meeting next week. In general, there's two different ways that we can borrow money. We can either work directly with financial institutions through what's called a private placement, which makes the interest rates are typically higher, but the costs, as far as the upfront costs, are lower. So that's a good solution if you don't need to borrow a lot of money or if it's going to be pretty short term. In this case, because we're borrowing a fairly substantial amount and it's going to need to be paid back over a longer period of time, especially with those TIF district incentives. That's why it makes sense to do a borrowing where we issue bonds in the financial markets. The initial costs are higher, but the interest rate expense is lower over the long term.
Excuse me. Thank you, Comptroller Treasurer. Do you have kind of a target where we think the bond interest is going to come in at?
It should be very competitive based on what we're currently seeing right now. I guess I would say I would be, especially on the tax exempt borrowing, I would say it should be no more than 1.5%.
Wow.
On the taxable borrowing, maybe like 1.75 to 2. So it should, right now, it is a good time to borrow money, just because interest rates are definitely down and investors do not have a lot of options to really get much yield in terms of buying bonds.
That is a very attractive rate, indeed. Questions from the committee?
I guess, are you looking for any sort of motion, or is this kind of more of just kind of giving us a heads up?
Yeah. It's up to you if you want to approve the concept or not. Otherwise, there will be a resolution on council. So if you don't wish to take any action, I guess just, hopefully be prepared that the resolution will be coming on the council meeting next week.
In my mind, it's always kind of nice to get a sense of the finance committee. At least that should be our purpose. And it's a good question, Alder Slawinski, but I think I would love to see a general sense of the committee and would love to see a motion on this.
I would move to approve.
I have a motion and a second. Motion by Slawinski, second by Morrow. Any other discussion? All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed would be no. And abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you very much. This is another item. Item 5, discussion on developing a policy related to the use of contingency funds. I'm sorry. We already have kind of a generalized policy, but I think it's important we have new members to our council. And I think it prudent annually to review those policies as it relates to fiscal and monetary policy. And this is one of them. You saw Comptroller Treasurer's memo. And if you would just quickly kind of outline that for those who haven't reviewed it yet, particularly members of the public who may not have taken the time to review that.
Sure. So this relates to our current policy on the use of contingency, and then also kind of an overlying question of, do we want to establish a more extensive policy on the use of contingency. Right now, the only requirement related to contingency is in our city ordinances. It is required that for an appropriation to be made from the contingency line item, that requires an affirmative vote of 3/4 of all members of the city council. So what that effectively means is that in order to spend contingency money, you need 9 out of the 11 alderpersons to vote in the affirmative. And I should note that the requirement is 9 regardless of how many are present. So you do have a potential odd situation if you have 8 members, which would be a quorum. 8 is the minimum that the council needs for a quorum. In that case, even if all 8 voted yes, the motion to spend that money would fail. So that's something to think about in terms of if we want to make any changes there, or if we want to establish more detail in a policy. But I wanted to sort of get the thoughts of the committee first, so that if we do decide to do a policy on contingency, I guess I'd like some direction as far as what we want to see in that policy, so that I can put something together that addresses sort of what the council is looking for. And then the only other thought that I would have on contingency is I think whatever policy we develop, it's never good if we make a policy that we then decide not to follow. So I think it's important that we develop a policy that we are going to be willing to follow, and that allows, sufficient flexibility to be able to do some of the things that you might want to have the option of doing.
Thank you, Comptroller, Treasurer. Appreciate that. Could you just briefly, we want to know where the contingency fund money comes from. We should probably just provide that bit of information as well.
Sure. So the contingency line item, it is a line item in the operating budget. So it is part of our $25 million operating budget. We do try to make sure that we have some money in contingency just to account for any of those things that are unexpected that come up. So it's $100,000, and in general, we've usually been pretty good about not going over that $100,000. We certainly have some years that hit contingency a little bit harder than others, but in general, the council has stayed within the $100,000 line item.
Thank you. And I agree with you. Being overly prescriptive probably eliminates the opportunity to do things that we might find interesting or needed in the future. The purpose of this discussion isn't necessarily to create more prescriptive requirements, but rather to inform and just affirm that we feel comfortable with the method by which we allocate contingency funds. I just believe it's very important for buy-in by all members of the council as it relates to this kind of distribution of money. Any questions on this, comments on this particular topic from members of the committee?
This is Alder Slinsky. I guess I would like to keep it as is. My fear is if we add more requirements, we could potentially tie our hands. I've seen many items come up to, for contingency money requests. And again, I think if we can get the super majority, 9 of the 11 on board, I think it would be something that would justify that, spending the money on that item. So again, I just have a concern with, putting more restriction just in case we get ourselves in a dilemma and we wouldn't meet the parameters of the restrictions.
Thank you, Alder Slawinski. Any other comments? Questions?
Alder Dalton, I just have a quick comment.
Sure, please go ahead.
Sure, please go ahead. Yeah, I'm supportive of the policy as it stands, and I think if there's ever a quorum or the kind of specific situation where we have the 8-member quorum but not the 9 members present, I think we're capable and have in the past of calling a special meeting if the issue is something that is a timely issue or just necessary. And I think that the council and leadership will be able to recognize when that seems appropriate.
Thank you, Alder Dalton. Any other members of the committee? Any other alders who wish to weigh in on this? Very well. Members of the public? So in order to formalize this, I guess I would like to see a motion to affirm that our current policy is that which we wish to keep, at least for now. And I would entertain a motion, not by a dasher.
I would move,
So moved.
as you stated.
Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, I'm having dog trouble, probably. I think it was Alder Morrow. Was that your motion?
Correct.
And then we had a second by Alder Slawinski.
Correct.
All right. Barring any other conversation, I will call for the vote.
President Johnson?
Oh, yes,
I'm sorry.
absolutely.
I want to clarify. You're going with a supermajority of 9, even though you could have a quorum, or were you going to drop? By leaving it the way it is, you're leaving it at 9, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
You are very welcome. Good question. I'm glad you clarified. All right, we have a motion on the floor to leave our contingency fund policy and the ordinance as it's written in place for now. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed would be no. Anyone who wishes to abstain? Motion carries. Oh my gosh, I feel like I have a child with me today. Sorry about that. My dog is just not being nice. My apologies to everybody. And item 6, we have a discussion on the use of unspent budget funds. And Corey, once again, thank you for putting your memo together. And again, if you could just provide the explanation you did so that everyone is on the same page.
Sure. So every year we are fortunate to have some unspent budget funds, both in our capital budget and in our operating budget. And what will happen with that money, if it's capital dollars, the first question is, okay, was the project completed or was the project delayed? So at the end of every year, I do communicate with all of the department heads to find out the status of where things are at with their capital projects. And we'll either encumber that money, which basically means that we continue to have it set aside if the project wasn't completed, or if they say, you know, no, this project came in under budget and we don't need the rest of the money, then what we do is that money then becomes available for other capital projects, which certainly is very helpful as we try to address all of the needs citywide. And then with the operating budget, we also do have unspent operating funds every year. And what happens with those is they do go into fund balance, which is basically our savings. And then we do put that into capital projects. So if there's unspent monies, for instance, this year, there will be unspent mileage expenses and education expenses based on no one doing, you know, training or no one doing in-person training. So all of those line items that don't get spent, all that budget money that doesn't get spent, what will happen with that is then that goes into our capital projects so that we're able to get some of these capital projects done. That is a significant source of funds for the capital budget. For the 2020 capital budget, we're using about $974,000 of unspent operating funds in the capital budget. And definitely that is helpful because, as we know, capital is always a challenge. So that's basically what happens to the unspent budget monies. And what I tell, all the departments is basically, if you don't spend it, it does effectively come back in terms of more money for capital and to help, basically it helps all of the departments with some of their capital needs.
Okay, in your memo, you had a preliminary recommendation that says, with all that in mind, as a first step, I would suggest that we at least give consideration to the prior year's budget performance for individual departments when making decisions on the capital budget. Do you think that that should be proportional? For instance, we have some operationally very heavy departments that have very heavy expenditures, like streets department, right? Public works, versus maybe, the office of the attorney, city attorney might not have as in-depth operational costs, but they may have some savings. So do you think a proportion of budget rather than a pure sum is appropriate?
Well, we could look at something like that because, one of the other considerations, and I think the city attorney is a good example of a department that probably doesn't have a lot of capital projects that they need. I mean, they might need, a new computer equipment or a new software package. But, beyond that, the city attorney typically most years does not have a capital request. So I think that's sort of another wrinkle. And that's why I suggested, okay, just giving consideration that, if it's a department that doesn't really have a lot of capital needs anyway, or doesn't have a lot of capital needs that aren't otherwise being addressed, it might not make a lot of sense to say, okay, city attorney, we're going to put, $2,000 aside for whenever you need a capital project, and we don't know what that is. So I think, in general, the departments with the biggest budgets, there's really 4 departments that have the biggest budgets in the city, and that's Department of Public Works, Police, Fire, and Parks. So those are the ones that have the biggest operating budgets. That's really the bulk of what the city does, or a very large percentage of it is within those 4 departments, and those departments would also have the most intensive capital needs. But, it is somewhat of a complicated topic just because, you obviously have to take a lot of different things into account, such as, okay, is this something that was within their control or not within their control? Certainly I think if a department has usually done well with their operating performance, and then, one year they have a bad year due to very justifiable reasons, I also don't want to hold it against them to say, well, too bad your capital projects aren't going to happen because you had one bad year. So I think there's, definitely there's a need to keep some amount of, I guess, discretion or, reasonableness in terms of how you would do that. So that's why I'm saying that we just give consideration to it, but that we don't say this is the, this is what it is, and this is the policy, and end of discussion.
So before I ask further questions, one more question. Would it be, so one way we might do this so that we have finance committee actually involved in a fiscal policy would be when it comes time, so it's post audit, right? You've closed out the year, you're closing out the audit. We now know what those sums are. And now we're ready to start looking at moving things into reserve or encumbering any monies that we need to for future projects that have already been allocated. To revisit this, to evaluate those, and then have a discussion about, because let's say we have a terrible situation in the Middle East and now fuel prices quintuple. Our traveling rich departments, the police department and streets, I mean, it's completely out of their control what happens there. So could we look at something like that to at least look at those numbers, evaluate those as a finance committee, and say, you know, this is how we want to allocate, or how we'd like to see the award of additional capital monies back to maybe well-performing departments.
Yeah, I think we could certainly take it up at that time and review, how all the departments did and sort of what we want to do.
Okay. Thank you for that, and thank you for putting together the memo. I appreciate that, and thank you for working with me on this. Other questions or comments from members of the committee? I know public finance isn't a whole lot of fun, but actually, I think it is. Well, but go ahead, Alder Slawinski.
I guess just my question, or I guess my thoughts. I guess I don't know what is there. I mean, is there an issue with department heads? Basically saying, "Hey, I saved all this money last year, and I need this done. I want more money this year," type thing. I guess I don't know what brought this on. I think, ultimately, and I believe that every one of our department heads, they run as fiscally responsible as they can, and that, in the long run, we are all working for the taxpayers, and, it's all going back into that pot. I don't know if, I guess I'm just a little confused here. I mean, is it something where there's some friction where, one department head saying, I'm saving all this money, and yet when it comes to budgets, I get all mine cut? I don't know. I don't know the background of this, but I guess that's my thoughts is, I mean, ultimately we're all in this together here, and we all have the same goal in mind.
Absolutely.
To run efficient. And so I guess that's my thoughts, I guess, as far as if anything needs to be changed. I don't think so.
Sure. Kind of how this started is not necessarily friction. As a department head myself, this is a topic that my colleagues where I work for Marathon County, we have occasionally we work as a team and evaluate a lot of different things, and this comes up for discussion. X department has excess. They did well in their budgeting, and now they have the excess. What does that mean? Does that mean, again, do we look at giving them preference on a capital project or some other sort of preferential sort of allocation? And again, these are general musings of department heads when we all gathered together. So it prompted me to ask the question. And again, as a finance committee, I think it's important for us to understand from a fiscal policy what happens when money isn't spent at the end of a budget cycle, where it goes and why it happened. So that's why this was brought forward. I just thought it was important for us to have the discussion. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
You are very welcome. Any other comments from members of the committee?
Alder Dalton here. I appreciate you raising that question, Alder Slawinski, because it does sound like the process that directors go through in terms of prioritizing the capital and kind of negotiating that amongst themselves should be a pretty good process. And I think all of them have the incentive to really be under budget when appropriate, because it does come back around for them. I think one thought that I had that could be helpful, and this might be just another layer of challenge for the collective directors making this prioritization, is for all the projects that are listed as requests but unfunded in the proposal, of some sort of like collective prioritization of like, here we are as a city, we have a number of projects that are not going to get funded this year, and maybe we're requesting it for 2022, but if there is some availability this year, either because of timeliness or necessity, like it might be very important that we try to get to these projects as well. I think that could be a helpful step. And just because of the nature of each department's unique kind of operations, it's like the police department is able to fund one of their requests because of asset forfeiture program, but it's like the parks department doesn't have an asset forfeiture program to ask for funding. So there's just all these different dynamics, and I think a collective kind of recommendation from the staff on what priorities for unfunded things might be could be a helpful recommendation for the finance committee too.
Excellent, thank you. Anyone else? Any other alders?
President Johnson, I have a comment.
Yes, ma'am.
I think returning some of the money for public safety equipment, I think would be appropriate. If you look at the kind of gear that our police and fire departments need, a lot of times they're stretching equipment a year beyond when it's really safe. I think things should be looked at, but if there's some critical piece of equipment that's going to affect our police and fire department's ability to do their jobs and protect our community, I think that should be high up on the list of, not to say that the streets department doesn't affect public safety either, it does. But when you call 911, you're generally not looking for a pothole filled. So I just would like to say, I think those departments in particular should get some consideration if there's some money left over. Thanks.
You are very welcome. Any other alders?
I would just like to just kind of comment off of that, as I feel every department is equally important. You know, if you don't have you have a street that's all busted up, how's the ambulance going to get down there? So again, just my comment.
Yeah. It's a well taken comment, Alder Slawinski. Thank you for that. I also think that if we don't have parks, that would really suck too. So any members of the public who wish to comment? Again, I'm checking my Brady Bunch boxes. All right. There's no action necessary. Again, my goal as chair of the finance committee is to bring some of these policies that have been kind of in existence, but never, not necessarily discussed at a broad level, is to bring them to you for these kind of discussions, because I think it's a healthy thing to do, and I appreciate the discussion. I suspect that we will be bringing this back as we close out the year and look at the performance of our wonderful departments and where that money will go as we close out the year if we have excess budgetary income. So thank you, everyone. I know I'm putting you through a lot. and I appreciate your patience. And then item 7, accept and place on file letters of support for the Plover River Crossing project. Sorry, when you talk too much, sometimes it just falls apart. I want to acknowledge, because this is obviously, as this moves forward, the community involvement is going to be huge, particularly as it relates to trying to raise money for this. And my understanding is that very much like our Friends of Emerson Park, there is in the works, I don't know what they'll be called, Friends of the Plover River Crossing Trail or something else. But again, just want to acknowledge and thank the folks who wrote these letters. We have a letter from Century Insurance. And of note in theirs, they say 400 of their associates and 200 retirees live within 2 miles of the proposed project. University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, very nice letter. And they think this is a unique intersection of transportation, access, safety, recreation, economic development, and community partnerships. Stevens Point School District, we have a letter from the principal at Bannock School, of course, in Alder Kneebone's project, who is now taking advantage of the project on Walter Street. They feel this would be a great opportunity for families to engage in daily exercise. Key Mobility, great businesses really speaking up on, thank you so much. Empower more residents to be physically active while providing improved access. Ryan Rose from the Portage County Parks Department on behalf of the Portage County Parks Commission. The Stevens Point School District, Superintendent Gerlach, indicates the school district's unanimous support through the vote by the school board. Active Portage County. What is this? Town of Hull. The Town of Hull's Plan Commission, Parks Commission, and Board of Supervisors have endorsed this project. Hull indicates their interest in continuing to stay involved. We have a letter from Team Sherrill Companies that was previously received. And they are a business owner on the Far East Side and would anticipate greater traffic to their athletic fields. And we also have a letter from the Portage County Business Council. And my understanding is the Portage County Business Council was instrumental in helping to put together the Portage County Bike and Pedestrian Plan, which was approved, I believe, in 2012. And the Convention and Visitors Bureau. Again, my intent is not to read these in their entirety, but to thank all of the people who have submitted their support for this project and thank them. And I hope we can continue to count on not only their words of support, but other support as we move forward on this project. All right. Sorry, I am losing. There we go. Sorry about that. I had a split screen that wasn't working. All right, the next item on our agenda, item 8, is the approval of claims paid. I would entertain a motion.
Alder Dalton, so moved.
And Alder Dalton makes a motion to approve the bills that have already been paid. Is there a second?
I second.
Alder Morrow seconds. Any questions about the claims? Any questions from any other alders? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the claims paid, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed would be no. Abstention? Excuse me, I got the hiccups. All those in favor, please say aye. Oh, we did that already. Sorry. Motion approved. The hiccup just screwed me up. Sorry about that. All righty. Item 9. Adjourn into closed session at approximately 7:20. We really have to stop approximating these things. Pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85 paren 1 paren E, deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons required a closed session on the following. A, consideration of a potential donation of real estate for public park usage that is predicated on a commitment by the city to make certain investments in infrastructure at the site in question and which will potentially face complications due to implied or constructive easements benefiting adjacent properties. And item B, negotiating the purchase of properties and easements near Ben's Lane. I would entertain a motion to go into closed session.
So moved.
We have a motion by Alder Slevins. Is that, did I hear Alder Morrow?
Yes, Morrow, second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right. I believe we need a roll call vote on this.
Yes, we do. Slowinski,
Aye.
Shore,
Aye.
Morrow,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Dalton,
No.
4-1.
4-1, motion carries. We are in closed session.
Videos of these meetings are available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.